Welcome to the Economic Times Back to Business. News, analysis, and opinion on constructive policy-level solutions to the post-COVID challenges facing Indian business. The Economic Times is partnered with Google, Automation Anywhere, and the Union Bank of India. Thank you for joining us. Please extend a warm welcome to our eminent panel.
Welcome, audience. I hope you have a great session. And the topic for today is the forces shaping the future of work. And this has been a pretty common theme for webinars in the last few months. But I must assure you that Economic Times has put together an absolutely awesome panel. The diversity of their vantage points is unique, and you could expect very interesting insights. So without much ado, let me introduce the panelists. I'm sure none of them need any introduction, but let me do the formalities. So Deep Kaldra is the founder of CEO of Make My Trip. MMT's journey from being a pony to a unicorn has been pretty epic. And Deep has been one of India's poster boy entrepreneurs. Deep has also been very active in the startup ecosystem and is seen by many as a mentor. And interestingly, Deep is part of an industry. He's a demigod of an industry that has been badly impacted by the pandemic. And it's very interesting to hear him say that he's been advising the government to be a little more thoughtful in relaxing on the travel norms. So welcome, Deep.
Thank you very much, Hari, and very nice introduction and nice plug for your book. So well done.
Great, thank you. Now let's come to Heather. Heather Emsley is the Asia Pacific head at Google. She's responsible for G Suite and Google Cloud. She was with Microsoft for over a decade. She's best placed to talk about the digitization of the workplace and the role technology and AI has played in shaping the jobs landscape and continues to shape the job landscape. Welcome, Heather.
Right, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks.
Manish Sabharwal wears many hats. He's the founder of TeamLease, and he's been at the forefront of policy discussions related to labor legislation in India. Manish is also on the board of the Reserve Bank of India. Welcome, Manish.
Thank you.
Rajiv Dubey is the principal advisor at the Mahindra Group. He has worked for two large and iconic business houses, namely the Tatas as well as the Mahindras. Rajiv brings a rich and diverse set of insights on how large industrial conglomerates operate. Welcome, Rajiv. So let me start right away. Deep and Manish, let me start with you. Has the coronavirus permanently transformed the traditional workplace? Are you seeing any new trends that have been triggered? Are any existing trends being accelerated? Basically, has this pandemic permanently transformed the workplace?
Okay, Manish, you want to go first? Okay, I'll go ahead. Okay, I think the short answer for that all-important question, Hari, is yes. I think there's a transformation which is immediate, and immediate, of course, is largely the workspace has moved home. And at least for most of India, and we were just discussing that in the pre-conference, pre-panel call, for most of India, people are not going to work yet unless they have to. So manufacturing has to go to work, but even in manufacturing, people are trying to enforce social distance norm as they have to, and making various changes. But the office as we know it right now is largely vacant. I have spoken to maybe about 100 people directly, indirectly, and tried to understand, because as we were trying to open up our own offices, what people are doing. And the norm is very simple. If you can manage from home, please work from home, because the risks and the potential downside of opening up is so high that you'll take one step forward and few steps back. We on our own part have opened up tentatively. We had a few random meetings. We're a public company. When we reported our last earnings call, a few of us preferred to do it from office. Then 2 weeks ago, we had a 2-hour meeting just to acclimatize some people. Are you actually ready? Because there's 2 buckets of people. And of course, there's always a lot in the middle. One bucket of people who randomly keep on pinging you and saying, hey, we want to get back to work, boss, missing office, etc. And the other bucket of people saying, no, I'm not coming in. I can work as hard as you want from home. So the guys who were very keen, and when I say guys, I obviously mean guys and gals, who were very keen, we said, okay, why don't you come to office? Let's do 5% of office capacity and by line of business. The findings were interesting. I think it's very uncomfortable to be working with a mask. There's no denying that. If you give enough space to people, they can lower the mask and speak, but they take a risk. And again, if someone were to fall sick, I think you take many steps back. Now let's fast forward this to when the pandemic, we think, comes under control, if not over. You know, we've got the advantage of Heather out here from Singapore, and she'll share a very different view of the pandemic than what we are facing in India. Or, you know, my son is based in Zurich, and basically there's almost like there's no COVID. I mean, you wear your mask only when you're in a public transport like a train or a tram, and otherwise you don't need to, and people are swimming in the lake. So that gives us hope. One day we will get there. But I think even when we get there, all smart businesses are going to question and are going to ask, do we need so many people to come to work? Do we actually, should we not take these learnings forward of a fairly productive pandemic, at least the first 2 months of hyper productivity, whatever you were doing? Our tech folks, our product folks, UX folks were super busy. But then after that, it began to peter down, but it's still fairly productive. So what I see, long story short, I see a hybrid model emerge. I see people coming into work anywhere between 2 to 4 times a week. So let's say you come in for 3 days, you work from home for 2 days. I think it'll become the norm, and definitely in a sector like ours, which is largely in the tech space, where we can work from anywhere. And that means dramatic savings too. And I think the biggest saving is going to be on people's time. And I'm hoping that'll give I'm hoping people can, even spend more time. As we've all realized, it's a joy, and we tend to forget these joys of enjoying breakfast and lunch and dinner, all 3 meals with the family. And I encourage all my team. I said, even if, please have a half an hour gap for lunch so that everyone can have their lunch. Why won't you do that? I mean, sometimes you end up, of course, eating on a Zoom, but you don't want to. So that's what I feel.
Great.
I feel forward we are going to change.
Right, interesting. So blended work, blended office work and home. That's great.
Yeah,
so Manish,
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, I'm a big believer that, these kind of crises don't create new trends, they accelerate ones. And obviously, for the last 30 years, we've been seeing trends. Employment has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. Employers don't have one circle of employment, they have concentric circles with all kinds of employment. So the diversity of employment has been happening. I mean, pyramids had become cylinders. Now they're going back to being Eiffel Towers, getting rid of middle management. So I think that there's, these trends have been around for 20, 30 years. So around employment, I think the diversity of employment contracts, the diversity of separating work from a job has been going on for some time, but it will be accelerated by this. The second one I'm a little more queasy about, because 85% of people can't work from home. If you work with your hands and legs, you can't work from home. You can only work if you work. So the cognitive elite like us can work from home. So first of all, this is not a, the perennial pandemic seems to be people believing that everybody lives like them, but 90% of India can't work from home. So for them, this is not the experience. And even for the cognitive elite, I would submit that, working from home for me has become living at work, and it's not that fun. So living at work is not my idea of a life. And so I think working from home is nice, but so we have to be careful with this sort of, and to me, maybe we'll come to this later, but an argument against offices is an argument against cities, right?
Correct.
I mean, New York.
I was coming to that later.
New York's GDP is equal to Russia, with 6% of the population and 0.00005% of the land, for a reason that there are benefits to coming together. But of course, the stuff that Deep said, that I think it'll be more flexible, is clearly on the cards. But I don't think this is the end of employment, nor do I think it's the end of offices.
Great, Manish. I think we'll come back to what impact it would have on urban agglomerates and cities. We'll come back to that in a bit. So Heather and Rajiv, one question is, we've been working from home, at least, as Manish said, those of us who are privileged to work from home have been working from home for the last 4-5 months. So what has worked? What hasn't worked? And remote working is not new. The entire outsourcing industry, multinationals operating in different countries with distributed teams, have all been used to some kind of remote working. So the playbook in some ways seems to have been partially written, at least. So what has worked and what hasn't worked in the last 5 months?
Yeah, maybe Heather should go first and I'll bring up the rear.
So it's actually been a really interesting time the last couple of months, I think, for us, just working with our customers. So we've had some customers who've been very fortunate, and their transition has been pretty simple for most of their workers, to Manisha's point, that could actually perform their function at home. Yeah. So the ability to move from a work office into a home office has been fairly simple from a technology perspective. However, technology is only one element of the work from home perspective. Not every home has an office. I'm fortunate, I have a room that was already set up as my office. My husband had to, unfortunately, take up the dining room table. I've had people in my team who didn't even have the luxury of a dining room table. They still live at home with their parents, and they've had to make makeshift office in their bedroom. Others haven't had enough bedrooms for the 3 kids that are at school. His teacher wife, he's been sitting in his main bedroom doing calls. So yes, technology has been there, and it's really been easy for many companies to move there. But then there's been the physical element, which has been a challenge. The other challenge has really been around organizations where we quickly adopted technology, some sort of video conferencing technology, to make sure that everyone could connect. But now more and more, we're having a lot of companies come back to us and say, okay, maybe we need to relook at this. We might have compromised a policy. We're no longer in control of sometimes the devices and the network that our people are working on. Does this cause a potential security risk for us? So a lot of companies are coming to us and saying, okay, what is it we need to think about from how do we secure our video conferences? If we are recording them, are they being secured in an encrypted environment? What do we need to do on the device to make sure that in an unmanaged network, I'm protecting my data that is being stored? So that's another scenario that's come up quite a lot in our customers in the last 2 to 3 months. And then more recently, it's ease of collaboration. So not only about the video conferencing, but what are the tools I need to not do synchronous collaboration. So I work on a doc, I attach it to an email and I send it on. How do you start bringing groups together to work on a budget spreadsheet, on a document, on a presentation at any point in time, where we can be on a video conference and all of us be contributing at the same time? So that topic is coming up a lot more in there. We have seen the rise of AI tools as well, and that is more around things like automating mundane scenarios. So for instance, we've seen some call center technology where...
So maybe Heather, what I'll do is I'll specifically come to AI, because I think that's in itself...
Okay, I'll stop on AI, we can talk there. So those are the main things. So really around video conferencing, workplace scenarios, security has become top of mind, and then really collaboration or knowledge sharing tools. I'll stop there and let Rajiv add a bit more on that, but yeah.
Thank you, Heather. So a lot has been said. If I'm repetitive, forgive me. The first thing was that all of us discovered we could do much more than what we had thought working from home. Second is, it's very stressful. I think there's a complete erosion of the work-life balance, and I think some of the earlier speakers talked about it. I think it requires, we've discovered it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of trust and the ability of the command and control leadership to let go. So ironically, whereas technology is sort of becoming very important, and you know how to deal with technology, the inner space, that is coming to the fore, who the leader or who people are, because it's, how do you generate the trust? How do you generate the space for people? How do you let go of command and control? How do you show empathy to people? How do you not intrude on some time of theirs, because different people have different times and bosses are so used to picking up the phone and ringing up any time, and you may well disturb somebody, especially if they have young children. And I don't want to sound sort of sexist, but I think the working women, especially those with young children, seem to be having a really difficult time. So these are some of the things that I would like to report back on what we have learned and what are some of the problems that we need to deal with.
Great. Thank you, Rajiv. Let me just switch gears a little bit. Manish, I have a question for you, and I don't think anyone is better placed than you to respond to that. You know, all economic development throughout the world, anywhere, including India, has been on the back of migrant labor. And you all of us saw what happened to the migrant labor in this pandemic. In fact, millions of migrant workers trekking back to their hometowns, on dusty roads became the face of the COVID crisis in India. So how do you see this unfolding? This has exposed the fragility of the migrant workforce model. So what changes do you see in the migrant labor landscape, and how do you see it impacting economic recovery?
I don't think there's some such thing as a migrant labor model. I mean, you can't take jobs to people. You have to take people to jobs. I mean, that's the law of gravity. So if we thought we could take jobs to Bihar, UP, we would have done that a long time ago. So my sense is productivity of states, Karnataka, where I live, is 1/3 the number of people in UP, but it has the same GDP as UP. So we're 3 times more productive. If you think about firms' productivity, there's obviously a 22 times difference in manufacturing productivity between the top and bottom quartile. And obviously in individuals, there's a 200 times difference in productivity. So I would just say the migrant labor challenge that we had, there are about 70 to 75 million migrants in India interstate, of which 30 million are dependent. So there are about 45 million in the labor force. About 4 to 6 million have gone home. So while I appreciate the TV and the outrage, it's about 10% of migrants, and many of them are already back. I think the migrant explosion happened for 2 reasons. One is the lockdown kept getting extended, so they were vela, they had nothing to do. And second is they had no way to get home. Once they had a way to get home, they didn't actually want to get home, right? If you're in a locked room, suddenly if the door is going to stay locked, you want to get out. But once the door and window is open, you don't. So I would submit that was a peculiar set of circumstances of all travel being suspended. And so on an ongoing basis, I don't think UP is or Bihar or Odisha or Madhya Pradesh in the short run can become job magnets. A leader is a dealer in hope, as the Chief Minister of UP says, but is trying to be, but hope is not a strategy. And there's no way that you're going to have, IT or manufacturing in the short run go to Bihar or Odisha or this. So I would submit, and for going back to normalcy, migrant labor isn't the binding constraint. The binding constraint are 2 things, demand and virus. First we need to know whether we are at the start, middle, or end of the virus. And on demand, we need to know whether consumers will be hedonistic or they will be frugal when the virus ends. Will consumers save for a rainy day or will they live for today? I don't think any economist can model that. So demand and virus are the 2 binding constraints for normalcy. Migrant labor isn't.
Got it. Interesting.
Sorry, can I just chip in?
Yeah, absolutely, Rajiv. Please.
Of slightly changing the way to look at it. I think the question is not only of migrants, because migrants are, I think, a subset of a larger body called the informal workforce, right? Which is 93 or 94%. These people are outside the pale of the law that applies to other people. And the question really is, how do you make these people more productive? And I think there some fundamental questions may get raised, arising out of the sort of dramatization that we have seen, which is not a wrong portrayal of the migrant problem. So I actually see a whole series of questions being raised, leading hopefully to some changes in the way we view the informal workforce, and the focus being on productivity. And that productivity requires some investments to be made. And therefore, to look at labor as a short-term cost to be minimized versus saying, if we were to make some investments, is the improvement in productivity going to far outweigh the cost of making the investment in, say, their skilling, a little bit of social security, slightly better wages, some basic hygiene factors. I think that debate will get intensified, and I personally hope that it will lead to some result. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, lovely. I just so let's just build on this a little bit. I think both Manish and Rajiv. So I think we keep hearing, that you need more legislation to protect the gig workforce. At the same time, several states, UP was one of them, have gone overboard and relaxed labor laws. So I think from time to time you keep facing these extremes, which is total protection for the workforce and binding the hands of businesses that are creating jobs. At the same time, how do you do that right balance that would protect the workers and also give business sufficient room to operate without these onerous rules and conditions? Where do we go from here?
So I'm quite clear. India doesn't have a jobs problem. We have a wages problem. I think that there was many stupidity in the beginning of the lockdown that India has a 28% unemployment rate. I mean, first of all, on Sunday afternoon, India's unemployment is 75%, right? Your office is closed. You can't go to work. So it's a little silly to be measuring unemployment in a legal lockdown. But anyway, unemployment is the wrong number. India's problem is employed poverty. Right, our unemployment has hovered between 6 and 8% since 1947. People get excited with small movements, but so our problem, as Rajiv said, is productivity. Now the question is, do India's labor laws protect labor or do they help enterprises? They are basically pro-bureaucrat. They don't help labor because we have 90% out of it. They don't help employers. You don't have a single factory in India with more than 50,000 in one place, which is what exactly terrifies the China factory refugees. Because all of us in India have made our lives in the transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced. But a foreign investor will read the law as it is written, and he will say, well, I'm not going to. So I think labor, you can't comply with 100% of India's labor laws without violating 10% of them. We have 17 definitions of workers, 22 definitions of wages, 21 definitions of enterprises. So I am quite clear that if India wants to attract the China factory refugees, if we want to reduce our 90% informal labor force, then attacking labor laws is a part of the solution. Is it zero labor laws? Obviously not. The Paracelsus, he was the father of, he was a Renaissance physician. He used to say the dose makes the poison, right? Anything powerful enough to help has the power to hurt. So obviously labor laws can hurt enterprises, as we have seen in the last 50 years. India's labor is handicapped without capital and our capital is handicapped without labor. But moving to zero labor laws is obviously not a solution either. But I think today we are erring too much on the side of labor laws not being pro-labor, not being pro-employer. They are pro-bureaucrat, pro-labor inspector. In other words, they're pro-corruption.
Got it. Rajiv, you want to add anything before
Yes. So I would also say that a proliferation of laws is certainly going to be damaging more than anything else. The important thing, I think, is the way people are defining the problem. And what are we having enough of conversation and dialogue between, if you like, labor and management? And everything to be focused on productivity and how do we become more competitive and yet be fair and inclusive. But fairness and inclusivity have to go hand in hand with productivity. So it's as you say, a delicate balance. I don't think there is any cookie cutter answer, but I think the awareness and a shift in the thinking away from a giving and taking and negotiating wages, which seems to be the focus at least in the organized world, to how do we make ourselves more competitive? How do we engage our labor force more? That is what is required.
Great. So coming back to digitization a bit, Heather, would you want to tell us a little bit about how digitization is going to shape the workplace of the future? What it has already done, I think most of us have a sense of that, but would you want to look into the future and tell us about how a future workplace from a digitization perspective would look like?
So digitization is a very broad topic. So maybe I'll just go a little bit more narrow. So there's the workplace scenario where you'll find people have already been moving away from paper-based, but we'll start seeing a lot more of that digitization coming in. But I think what's really exciting is how artificial intelligence is going to start coming into play to really help us through multiple scenarios. And it's things around automating tasks that could be repetitive. So for instance, let's take scanning of x-rays. One of the things that we're seeing is that you, instead of printing out those physical images, by keeping them digital and training a machine to start looking for exceptions rather than just analyzing every single one, will help us focus our people to focusing on the exceptions and finding the anomalies a lot quicker than going through hundreds and hundreds of x-ray records. So the role of a radiographer, I wouldn't say they would go away. What it would allow them to do is to work more in terms of focused on where your exceptions come in. So we'll start seeing some of those technologies accelerate from a digitization perspective. And that's the role that AI will play in that space.
Just one question, which is, I've been curious.
Sorry, go, Hari.
I'll come back to you. So I was just curious about one thing, which is, suddenly the pandemic hit us, and then in the first month, we all realized that we could work from home. A good number of people found themselves very productive. Why did it take the world, a pandemic, to realize that you don't need to commute 2 hours every day in bad traffic and assemble under one roof to get productive? Why did it take a pandemic for us to realize that?
I think people don't like change and people like control. This is my viewpoint. I've been fortunate pretty much since I've been able to. So I would say the last 7 to 8 years of my time at Microsoft, definitely my last 2 years at Google, I've always had the option to work from home. And I've had a lot of the ways that I've been able to work from home. Yes, I've had a work environment that requires travel, but it's all been about how I'm measured in terms of my performance. And it's been really around, not about me coming in at 8 in the morning and leaving at 5 in the afternoon, having my 1 hour tea break, 1 hour lunch and my 15-minute tea break. It's been about the outcome based that I've been measured. So that's because I've been fortunate to work for companies that have changed the way that they measure an employee's productivity. And I think suddenly, by being thrown into this work from home scenario, I was hearing stories about people who suddenly just had to get to their desk at 8 o'clock and leave their video on so that they could be monitored for working for the day. That has become less of a concern now. We're hearing less of those stories and more about what is it that you're outputting in the day. So the pandemic has caused us to change the way we look at how people work. And I think it's more about us as humans not liking change and wanting to have control of what our employees get out every day.
Great. So one question for you, Rajiv. This pandemic, has been different from all the other crises of the past. And one way it's been different is it's cut out socialization, and we are all social beings, right? So we don't get to talk to people. We don't, get to have these interesting conversations. Many of these conversations are not absolutely essential for doing our jobs, but they keep us going. So what impact is it having on all of us, you think? Cutting out conversation, cutting out socialization, but being reasonably productive. What's the impact?
Yeah. So, I think there is almost a paradoxical situation where I find that there is actually more of social interaction now, but of course it's happening virtually than was happening earlier. So it's not all bad news. I think the question is, how are we shaping those conversations and the collaboration, etc., that takes place? Are the tools that we use for virtual collaboration being used in a way that is encouraging people's innate desire to contribute, to be recognized, to connect? Or is it being used simply to talk about, have you done your job? What are the mistakes that you made? So how you use it is very important. Now, can a virtual collaboration ever substitute for a need for physical interaction? Can people continue to stay locked up in their homes? I don't think so. So I think it's beginning to tell, but ultimately, I think there will be, as many people have mentioned, a hybrid. Certain number of days, certain number of things happening here, but clearly it will not be a return to what it was before. And clearly, I don't think we have as yet overcome our need, our basic human need for some physical, if you like, socialization. So how we balance it is critical, but it's reaching a point. I know of many cases where marriages are breaking up, where children are becoming hyper and need attention. So the mental health and well-being is really being highlighted in a very big way here. And I don't think that's going to go away, that the light will be shone on it. Hopefully the virus will go away, or we'll get the vaccine and we'll be able to step out of our lives a little bit.
Yeah. So Deep, coming back to you, I think you understand the travel industry more than anyone else in the world, I'm assuming. And I think everyone is keen to know how the whole thing is likely to, unfold. Will people begin traveling after a while? Will travel be cut down? Will people stop doing meetings which are not necessary outside their base location? So just can you give us some insight? I think we're all very interested in how travel is likely to unfold, the future of travel, business travel, personal travel, vacations, everything.
Sure. No, I'll take a stab at it. And I definitely am not the most knowledgeable in travel in the world by any stretch. But I'm happy to share what I feel is going to happen. And it is undoubtedly, like Heather would know actually by fact, what are the most searched kind of phrases. I can tell you the most asked question of me by all my friends and family is, where can we go? When can we travel? And where is it safe to go? And it's evolving, right? The whole situation is evolving, whether it's within India, the quarantine rules between states are changing, whether it's even overseas. And if you look at overseas, can you go? And slowly there is some attempt at opening up with travel bubbles being formed, which has become a very interesting buzzword. I actually believe your social bubble, you will travel along with your social bubble and make it your travel bubble. And people are doing that. We are comfortable meeting this extended family or these 2 or 3 friends because we believe they're all being safe. Now we'll all get into a car or into our cars and we'll drive out and go somewhere. And if we are a little braver, we'll even, take a flight because the chance of catching the infection on a flight, if you're careful, is actually pretty low. But I believe for India, what is actually critical now is that we have testing protocols before we travel. There is no other way. Today, about 15% of domestic capacity is, or people are flying. 25 capacity is open, 25%, but only about 15% flying. Why are 85% not flying? They're not flying not because there's no need. Maybe some has come down due to less corporate activity. But actually, there was bigger need because this was summer season. Everyone wanted to get away. They are not flying because of the fear. It's as simple as that. So we've got to take away the fear in a logical manner. And the only thing you can do is tell people that everyone needs to get tested. If you're going overseas, you can definitely afford a test for 2,400 rupees. It'll come down to under 2,000 rupees if done in bulk. And then everyone who went to that airport was actually, at least they were 2 days ago or 1 day ago, they were negative. Test way better than it is today. And at least everyone on the flight, still keep your mask up. Don't let your guard down. For domestic, I've been advocating actually the rapid test just because of cost reasons. And quick, again, it's better than nothing today. I've been telling my hotel partners, why are you not testing people when they come in or after a day or two? What's the downside? And you're afraid people won't come. I think it's the exact opposite. More people will come if they have the surety that everyone's getting tested. But it can't be a voluntary thing. You can't tell people, do it if you want to. No, everyone's got to do it. And that's the only way. And we, unfortunately, have been slow on that. There is risk that India might end up being an international pariah with our cases and 65,000 a day and the rest of the world muting it, effectively choking the virus. It won't take long before some country will say, listen, we love your business, we love Indians, but guess what? Not right now. Before that, we need to make testing protocol both ways. So right now, we've already relaxed our inbound rule. So if you're coming back, let's say you were a NRI or an Indian stranded overseas, although I think the repatriation and evacuation flights have gone on far too long. So the reality is, if you were coming back into India right now and you test yourselves 4 days before you fly, you can show that negative PCR certificate and you don't have to get quarantined. Logical. Now, the country we are willing to accept this from should be accepting our test reports too. Don't 19 labs and we're all qualified labs. And if some of them are not doing a good job, knock them off. So I think that's the only way we will give confidence back that, listen, it's no less safe than going to office. In fact, it could be safer because you know everyone got tested. So that's my view. It's gonna be tough. I mean, as I always say, unfortunately, India has got all the factors you don't need to control a pandemic. We've got the population, we've got the poverty, and I hate to say this in front of a non-Indian, but we have the indiscipline, and we all know it. So the reality is we've got, unfortunately, all of these factors, and we've got to contend with them. And, so it's not going to be an easy haul. I think India will definitely stay the most impacted country for the longest time. So it's tough.
Great. Just switching gears a little bit once again, one problem I think we've all had is women in middle management and senior management. Would you think that, this pandemic and the work from home model being proved in many ways, will this increase women's participation in the middle and senior management levels? Will it reduce the number who drop off? Have you seen any of that? Have you heard any conversations around this? Any of you? It's open to all of you.
Maybe I'll just kick off. My thoughts are quite short and simple. I absolutely feel that organizations that start adopting a flexible work environment potentially will start keeping more women in their middle management and some of their senior management positions. Because if you look at some women that either hold themselves back from moving in or taking on those next level roles, it's often because they have family commitments. And doing some of those more senior roles doesn't have the flexibility to either take the afternoon off and do what is needed, or you don't have that ability to work at home today because you've got certain things that you need to deal with. And it's not only parents or mothers of children. I think it's in general women that have responsibilities, whether it's elderly parents, the running of the home. I mean, I'll be upfront, I don't have kids, but there's days when there's stuff going on, when the aircon doesn't work like today, or something goes wrong in the house, I invariably have to deal with it, just by the nature of various things. So having that flexibility, I think, is really important. And I do believe that women who have that access to that flexibility will definitely start taking more senior roles in organizations.
Great. Anyone else wants to add to this?
In our sector, I can say just very briefly, undoubtedly this is going to help. I think a lot of people stayed away from the workforce or didn't come back after maternity.
Yeah.
Even though I can say before it became a law, we moved to 6 months maternity leave, but even that's tough, right? Yeah. So a lot of people who didn't have help at home, so if they didn't stay with in-laws, etc., weren't comfortable leaving their kids with a maid, etc., they were basically opting out. And we were trying to give flexible work to some people, but it was always tricky. Who gets flexible and who doesn't? I think it's just going to be tremendous. I mean, I joke about it. A lot of kids have been born during this, and we have 3,000 people on our payroll. So we have every week another kid being born. And I've been saying there's been no better time to have a baby. I mean, once you go through the whole, you're done with like going to the hospital or going to the nursing home. But what a great time to spend, time at home with your baby. You don't need the outside world. You don't need anything. You're just so happy, including having, like, I have a niece who's 3 years old, and my brother and sister-in-law have complete entertainment at home. So they don't need to go out, the kids happy. So there's a phase, I think, which is good. But jokes apart, I just feel that this is going to be a big positive step. And I'm a big believer in our industry. And I'm totally with Manish. I mean, the tech industry is obviously just a small part of it, or the office or the knowledge workers, etc. But I can only speak for that. This is going to be huge for us. So I think it's going to change the way it's work. If it, like I said, if it can be 3-2 for some people, why can't it be, half a day every day for some people who prefer that, who want to time it with their, kids at school. So a huge believer that this will be a big thumbs up for women at work.
Great.
Sorry,
Heather.
Go
ahead.
That with flexibility, definitely when I was at Microsoft, I saw a lot of people moms and dads, because dads also have parenting responsibilities. Often they would prefer to do a 7 to 8 in the morning call, do that, miss the traffic, or 7 to 9, miss the traffic, and then head on to the office, and then leave at 3, pick up the kids from aftercare, get back, and then they would work once the kids are down between 7, 8, and then, but they were able to cut up their day around that. So just having that flexibility to be able to at least deal with the morning, get your day gone, get into the office, miss traffic, avoid that kind of congestion, do the in-person stuff, and then leave a little bit earlier. It was definitely something. So I'm actually from South Africa, so don't worry, we're also not disciplined. And we saw with the traffic between that, it was a big help for a lot of parents.
Great. So I think we're moving quickly to the last theme, which is, technology throughout history has shaped work more than anything else. And I think there is good amount of research to show that net technology has created more jobs than it has taken away. But there is a belief, which seems to be a fairly wide belief, that AI is going to change the future of work like nothing before, and maybe even reduce the number of people needed at work. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, any of you. Heather, maybe we can start with you if you have.
I'll go Rajiv, because I've shared some points of view as well. So Rajiv, I'll
Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right. In economics, there's a term ceteris paribus. If everything else remains the same. So if everything else remains the same, then clearly the number of jobs is going to go down because there is automation. But everything else is not going to remain the same. Right? And I personally hope that the power of technology will be used to solve a lot of fundamental problem areas where right now not too much employment is being generated. So, for example, using technology to sort out issues of healthcare, taking healthcare deep into the homes and say into rural India, using technology to solve waste management, using technology to solve the problems of water management, of governance. So I think a whole host of new industries, if you like, will get generated and they will create employment, but you'll require different skill sets. So I think very careful management and anticipation of what kind of skills will be required, what kind of new industries will come up, that is what will solve the problem, and not simply looking at a static situation where some kind of routine jobs are being replaced by people. So the same job can become far more productive, and the combination of man and machine or man and technology can actually not necessarily cut down the overall number of jobs. Having said that, I don't think one can be too glib about it. I think in the Industrial Revolution, I'm told it took 100 years to restore the level of employment that was there before machines came in. This is what somebody told me in a labor economist conference. I won't vouch for that figure. Sure. But there surely will be a time when jobs will go down and we'll have to manage that. Hopefully, because of these new industries and because of new forms of workplaces, we'll get an increase. That's my hope.
Thanks, Rajiv. Great. Manish and Deep, 1 minute quick, if you have an opinion.
I think that we have to be very careful in applying this to India. It is very relevant for countries at the frontier of productivity. If your per capita income is $50,000, I think it matters. But for India, I mean, what is the nightmare of rich countries? That 45% of their labor force will generate 14% of their GDP? Hamara kya bigaad loge? We are already there, right? I mean, half our labor force is already only generating 40. So I would be a little careful in this whole, we can get to $10,000 per capita income, irrespective of what happens in AI, ML, and automation if we fix land, labor, capital. So the question for the world, Rajiv's point is important, ceteris paribus, but for India, let's not worry about it.
Makes sense. Deep, any final thought on this?
Slightly contrarian view, I think can be used very productively actually for areas where we have backlogs. So Manish and I were having that sidebar on online dispute resolution. We had a call just recently with Niti Aayog on this. And it's a great place where we can use actually machine learning and AI to help us clean up the backlog of cases, which are routinized cases. So I think we have to apply. I'm with Manish in saying you don't need to do that in sectors where we have enough people. Let's play to our strengths. Let's not go and axe our own foot in a sense. But there are areas where we are far behind. We have huge backlogs where we can do clear up. Mainly, they could be the government itself. And the judiciary is one of those for sure. So let's use it judiciously. It's an amazing tool. We have 2 chatbots that we built. And I can tell you it's already saving us anywhere between 400 to 500 people, call center agents who would have been taking this call. Now, should they be doing something else? Absolutely. If they're not doing something else, we have a problem. But we also knew that we couldn't stay a country of call center agents forever. That's not very smart because that was going to get replaced, right? And Vietnam and others and Philippines they've been eating our lunch for a while. So if we didn't get a wake up call and get into value added services, so I think skilling becomes super important at this time. There is no dearth of brains. Unfortunately, they haven't had the right kind of schooling. So if we do it well, it can be our ally. If we don't, then we'll, I think, further worsen our problems.
Great. 10 seconds each of you. When will things come back to normal? And whatever you can define, whatever you think is normal.
So I don't think there will be the same normalcy that we had before. It's my view that we've changed the way things will work. There'll be new ways of working, new workplace policies, even the travel industry, which you touched on earlier. It took 9/11 to introduce TSA, and I'm quoting a colleague from the other day, but we will have new ways of commuting and traveling. This is going to sound like a brag, but I did 49 trips last year. Based on this, I probably will never travel to the extent that I did in the last year. Because there will be different thought processes to what is necessary travel and what's not necessary travel. So I don't think we'll ever return to
Ever. Got it. Great. Rajiv?
I know you said 10 seconds and I've gone.
That's fine.
But I think middle of next year, we will probably have some semblance of a normal.
I think let's move as Rajiv quickly, 10 seconds.
I think a lot, it will depend on when vaccines become available and get widely deployed. Then we'll return maybe to a new normal, but to at least out of this very, very strange, surreal situation that we are in.
Great. Manish, Deep.
Yeah, it's above my pay grade.
Okay. No, I'll go with Rajiv. And in fact, funnily enough, while we were speaking, I saw something pop up on the Bloomberg News that Vladimir Putin has just announced the first registered vaccine, and one of his daughters has taken it. So who knows? Right? I mean, I think we forget very soon. So I'm with Rajiv. If we have a cure and can bring mortality rates really low, if we have a vaccine that works, I think we tend to forget and move on. So till the next pandemic comes, that's the scary one. I think these cycles are going to be shorter and sharper.
So I think what maybe I will do is try and sum up, what some amazing people have already said. So I think I clearly remember a few things. One was, very few can afford to work from home in an Indian context. I think Manish made a brilliant point, which is, a few elite on webinars keep talking about work from home. How can we make it better? What better tools? But a good chunk of people will never be able to work from home. I work for Big Basket, and I know that 85% of the people don't have that luxury of working from home. It's people like me who can keep, talking about what better tools we could have to make ourselves more productive. But 85% to 90% actually go to the workplace, work in warehouses, and that's the way life is for them. I think Deep talked about, overall, there would be a blended model going forward. I think the pandemic has changed a few things irreversibly. I think the world has recognized that people can actually work from home and can be reasonably productive. Although I think we struggle to understand why. I think Heather tried to explain why, it took a pandemic for the world to realize that a good number of people can actually work from home. So I think we will have a blended model, as Deep mentioned. Not everyone would go to work every day. Maybe 20%, 30% would be there by rotation. Based on need, some people will go to the workplace. Collaboration tools, I think, are getting better every day, and collaboration tools are not just about Zoom and not just about video conferencing, but also about how do you make teams more productive, more effective, how do you share information, how do you ensure that people don't duplicate stuff, information is shared pretty seamlessly. I think Rajiv mentioned, talked about leadership styles need to change. I think this is something that we've all been hearing. You know, a good number of people in any organization, their sole role was to, you know, gather information, transmit, amplify, attend meetings so that they could update themselves, so that when their bosses ask them questions, they could look good. I think all that is going to reduce, and people will perforce be, you know, asked to delegate, would be forced to delegate, be forced to empower. I think that is going to change going forward. I think Manish talked about, I think Rajiv also talked about, you know, more labor laws are not the need of the hour. You know, whenever we see something wrong happening, a model produces some unintended consequence and people begin attacking that model. And which is, you know, the gig workforce suddenly went through some trouble, as a result of which there is a lot of talk about protecting them, introducing more labor laws, bringing them under the gambit of labor laws. I think what we don't need is more labor laws. What we need is how do we effectively implement whatever we have? How do we ensure that those who try to honestly implement these laws are treated differently from those who deliberately violate these laws? I think we also talked about virtual collaboration. I think Rajiv mentioned can never be the same as, you know, people meeting up in offices. And sooner or later, I think important whiteboarding sessions, getting in touch with people will become important. And the blended model of Deep will in many ways address this. And what I think was very good to hear, heartening to hear, was that everyone seemed to agree that you know, women will begin returning to the workforce, especially in middle and senior management levels where there has been a drop off. I think women enter the workforce at the junior level in same numbers as men, at least in similar numbers. But as they progress, I think they begin to drop off from the workforce. But I think what the pandemic has forced us to learn is that they can stay on because work from home is pretty effective. So that broadly, I think, is being the summary of this discussion. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Deep, Manish, Rajiv, Heather. Amazing session.
Wanted to formally welcome Mr. Sunil Bunjal, Chairman of Hero Enterprises, for his keynote address. Because these days, keynote addresses are delivered through through a unique mode, which we have not the old keynote addresses which which we are all used to 4 or 5 months back. So thank you, Mr. Mujal, for agreeing to do this, and we're looking forward to your address. I think it's a extremely important subject on which you're speaking. You know, the need for reskilling and the new skills that that will, of course, that we will need in this new normal. Because I think while we are all optimistic that a vaccine will be available a few months from now, I mean, I think as there are a number of stories and that to vaccinate a population of India's size, it will itself take a year. So I think we are stuck in this kind of a situation where hopefully the number of cases will come down for at least a year or a year and a half. So we will all have to adapt to this new normal, which involves right now working from home. But even when we get back to our offices, I think it will be for quite some time a hybrid model that involves. So it has accelerated a trend which was already underway. The digitalization, which we all talk about, has kind of accelerated in a very major way for all of us. I mean, so that's certainly one kind of skilling that will have to be done. It raises questions about the future of many sorts of industries. For example, the real estate, the commercial real estate space, or even sectors such as malls or malls and hotels and so on, which were so far dependent on a physical interface. I mean, at least in the short term, they will all have issues. And therefore, there will have to be a complete reskilling of the workforce, which will have to be done. And I think it's going to accelerate. I think Mr. Munjal will talk about this length, but will accelerate the use of artificial intelligence. It will accelerate the use of all kinds of productivity tools to make, and I think to make remote working much more productive. Well, the future is still quite uncertain. So as we speak, and it kind of changes on a day-to-day basis. So let me, without any further ado, request Mr. Munjal to shine some light on what he thinks is going to happen in the future.
Thank you, Bodhi, for inviting me. So first, my compliments to all of you for setting up this conversation on a subject which has become much more critical than even many of us realize right now. I would break this up into three parts, actually. One is what we need to be doing right now, therefore our skills, our ability, our capability, our approach and attitude to handling and getting life to some kind of a normal in the current situation. The second would be, what is the need that we have immediately following the ability to handle this pandemic in some manner? I am a little bit less hopeful than you, Bodhi. I think it's going to take a bit of a longer time than the next few months. In terms of behavior, we probably need to continue the protective behavior for about 2 years. In terms of impact on the economy, it is easily 2 to 3 years. So therefore, tailoring our behavior and skills in work and business will therefore need to be appropriate for that period. And third is beyond that. And I think all three in some sense are critical and important to debate and discuss right now. Because one thing is certain, that things need to change. And as we do know, thousands of years ago, Socrates said, the secret of change is not to try and fight the old, but to put our energy into building the new. And at this moment, there is a lot of fight still taking place in our minds, in our attitude, in our approach to either try and stick to the old or push away the old, rather than focusing on what the current and the new needs are. The good thing that has happened, fortunately, is that the adaptation to use of technology has been very, very quick, literally across the world. All kinds of institutions, individuals, families, businesses, governments have adopted the ability to communicate remotely. So telecommunications, availability of bandwidth, and the equipment that goes with it has been a big boon of the development that was taking place over the last 30 years, has truly got tested in this time. So if you look at our need now, so the current need is the ability to maintain safety and push us towards normalcy. I think that's very, very important. The second, and this sometimes also requires us to focus a little bit on the future at the same time to put those building blocks which will be beneficial in the future. I was reading the other day about a wonderful bridge that the Japanese built in the 1990s in Honduras over one of their biggest rivers. There was a massive storm in the country and everything else around that bridge broke down. Even the roads leading up to the bridge broke. The bridge was still standing there. But what the storm did was it moved the bed of the river itself. So the river is now outside of the bridge. The bridge is standing there with roads neither leading to or from the bridge. So we have to be careful. It's not just a new solution. Even the problems may actually change. So therefore, our ability to foresee things which are completely different from the way we imagine them today is one skill which is going to be necessary. The ability to last for a long time, we used to talk about generations which are strong for countries, nations, peoples, and the life in the animal kingdom that is the strongest that will survive. History has now shown us it is the most adaptable that actually survived. The cockroach has survived because they adapted. The turtles survived because they adapted. They changed with the needs that are around them. And so it is going to be for us now. The one absolutely essential skill that all of us require is to maintain our balance in a completely new work environment, a new work culture. The next is going to be, if I come down to the vertical skills themselves. So I'm going to break it up into two. One is the horizontal skills, one is the vertical skills. of the vertical skills that are required to be successful in business in the next 30 years, less than 40% of them even exist today. So we have no choice but to very quickly learn new things. Because if you look at even just this one machine, this iPhone or the smartphone that many of us use, this one device has more computing power and memory than the entire moon mission has. One mission had in the 1960s, I think it was 69 when it went up. And what this does is, it completely gives us the ability to do things which were not possible. Therefore, we need to adapt ourselves to a new way of getting information, understanding information, and conveying things. So the skills of what technology will do to jobs are going to actually change the very job itself. Therefore, the skill required to successfully execute those jobs, whether it is delivery of education or healthcare or transportation or food delivery. We are seeing this quite across the board. Therefore, the entire growth of the gig economy, which is one of the rapidly growing areas, is going to require a whole host of new skills, which till a while were not even, the words were not coined until recently. The second is the ability to have balance and the ability to communicate without physically meeting too many people. And this is now I'm talking about the current situation and also a little bit post the COVID pandemic reducing the behavior of people. I'm talking about the social behavior. Some of these things will spring right back, but some will remain. We probably will not go to a movie theater for the next year or two, but I would imagine 4 or 5 years later, we will be sitting in a movie theater. We will probably also be sitting in a stadium watching a game. But until then, it will have to be new behavior. So the same is going to be required of business, of managers, of leaders, to be able to communicate their wishes, their vision, their desire to drive their companies and businesses in a certain direction. They have to become better communicators, because when you're standing in front of people, your body language says much more than your verbal communication. And the body language that you communicate through only a video is again quite different. So the skill and the ability to convey a message remotely through a video message is one skill that all leaders and managements will have to learn. And this is amongst the horizontal skills. And also the ability to maintain a better balance of mind. Because one of the things we have seen, what staying by yourselves or loneliness does is it disrupts people's frame of mind. It causes things like depression and other mental challenges crop up. So we have to learn to live with this, to adapt to this as a new way of life. Going back to the vertical skills now, it is clear that even the traditional businesses, manufacturing businesses and trading businesses, are going to induct technology a lot more aggressively and a lot more rapidly than it had ever done before this. Earlier, the conversation about technology was something people used to have like an esoteric conversation about something which will happen in the long distant future. That future is here now. So we need to figure out how, therefore, am I going to do my job better and more effectively if there is a significant dose of technology left and right of what the things I work in. Or I may have to move left or right from where I am, because this piece that I'm working on may actually get replaced by a machine. Artificial intelligence, machine learning are no longer only words. They are real. We have seen them now work in the insurance industry, in the banking industry, in the distribution industry. There are companies after company that are now saying, let's quickly adopt these because they allow me to become more effective. So they're not all taking people away. Please understand, the one fear that many people have, that jobs will completely go away, is wrong. The jobs will get replaced to new jobs. Some of the jobs will become better because this is a tool that was not available to us. The other jobs is what we will have to reskill people for. So I think, as I said earlier, approaching this whole situation with an open mind and expecting the unexpected will be a necessary ingredient of all leadership and almost all managers. Because then and only then can you be successful regardless of what happens to the situation. One thing we have seen in life is no matter where you are, no matter what you do, that things will change. We have often heard the term change is the only constant in life. What we have seen now is the pace of change itself has changed. So for us to continue to be in leadership positions, to continue our lead over competition, we will have to move significantly faster than them, because the access to technology will change the access to knowledge as well for many, many companies. So if we are able to absorb much more knowledge, turn that into useful action and plans for our businesses, and then action that. So the skill required of this translation at each stage is going to be a skill which was only partially required earlier, because both the pace will be different and the ability to apply that knowledge will, of course, be quite different from what it used to be. Now, not everything will be different. We have to remember that there are some things which are going to remain constant. The quality of looking for people who are reliable, looking for integrity, looking for result orientation. So those horizontals will remain. In fact, actually, they will become more important, because you will now have to depend on people's intelligence on top of the machine intelligence. The machine intelligence will give us somewhat a similar playing field. The difference will be those who have access or lack of access to this playing field. That is a new bias that will get created in our system and society and in industry. So we have to fight that bias, as the many other biases that we've had in society. But on top of that will be the subjective ability to apply objective information and data that comes out of these machines. I think that's where the real skill to remain ahead or to become successful will lie. We will see brand new ideas in many startups, both addressing current needs as also creating needs that we did not know existed, because they will find either a new problem or a new solution to an old problem. And I think that will be the real game changer for all of us, how our lives will become easier, better, and more enriched due to technology on the one hand, attitude on the other, and the skill that we will learn, which will learn to adapt technology with the attitude of using technology for human beings' betterment. Rather than getting driven by technology, we have to learn to drive technology. So in some way, I would condense my entire message just in this, that if we can learn that change is going to be constant around us and will get even faster, that we need to be both responsible to machines, to people, and ecology environment at the same time, that the role of leaders in many ways will continue to be what it was, with the added responsibility of adapting to much more rapid change and conveying to people the need to accept this change for the business and for society to benefit from this, because at the end of the day, please remember, it is all and only about people. Thank you very much and all the very best.
By the way, I just wanted to ask you a question. We are just, do you
Sure.
think that there's also a possibility that you can extrapolate when you're in the midst of something as big as this, you can extrapolate too much from the current into the future? So we are, so there is talk that malls are dead and hotels are dead, etc. But do you really, or office space, but do you really think so, or do you think that in a year and a half, 2 years, they will eventually come back?
So I think it would be a mistake to expect that everything will come back as it was. That would be a big mistake, by the way.
Right.
But that nothing will come back is also not a possibility.
Right.
I think that's where the magic lies, and that's where the real skill lies today, in trying to figure out how much. So we've started. So in our office, for example, as you know, we do a lot of environment studies. So one of the things we are actually studying at this moment is categorizing all businesses, all activities into just simply 3 buckets. Of course, all of them have subcategories. So one category is those which have actually benefited from what's going on right now. Some of the healthcare services, etc. And we have a whole host of such things, communication services, which have benefited from this. Second are those which have taken a beating, but will turn around and come right back. So from the investment point of view, we look at them. From the operation point of view, we look at them. And then the third is category are those which are taken a beating and will never be able to fully recover. They'll either die or they will remain stunted or become a smaller part of the overall economy. So within then going into those, we've done subcategories, etc. So that's where we've been trying to figure out these, which are the industries, which are the sectors, and therefore which are the entities which you cannot extrapolate their past to define their future. And you actually mentioned exactly some of those that we are trying to study right now, because their behavior will have to change. If they don't, they will actually either suffer or completely die. And some companies will die without knowing why they've died. Because if they're not able to understand the shift that is taking place, it's happening underneath our feet. If you don't see it, and by the way, it may sound strange, but there are companies which still don't see it. They don't understand it. They continue to blame everything only on the pandemic and assume the moment this pandemic gets okay, everything will be back to normal. That, I think, is not the case.
Right. I guess all businesses will have to figure out which bucket they belong to.
Absolutely. That's important.
That's the big thing.
That is most important. And all of us have to think about ourselves as well, even our own businesses.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
All right. Good luck. Bye.
Lovely to be here. I'm sort of really delighted to introduce, a really distinguished panel. I want to start first with the lady in the center. That's Raj Kamal. So if you can just wave to the people. So we know Raj Kamal Vempati is the EVP and head of HR for Axis Bank. And then we also have Rashmi Daga, who's the founder of Fresh Menu. Rashmi, you can wave to our viewers so everybody knows. All right. And so that leaves the mystery. Who is Milan? Milan Sheth is the Executive VP for India and Middle East Africa for Automation Anywhere. That's right. That's Milan for you. And then, of course, we have D. Shiv Kumar. He also has the designation of having the longest designation I've ever seen. Group Executive President, Corporate Strategy and Business Development, Aditya Birla Group. All right. Thank you, Shiv. Okay, so we are going to actually talk about, this entire shift that has happened in the post-pandemic world. A couple of things have happened as, in my view, three big shifts that we can talk about. One is, the way we work has shifted. It used to be work from home used to be one of those options that was occasionally done. And very soon, the entire world shifted to work from home. And now, of course, it has now changed and become work from anywhere, because a lot of people are not even working in the places they were working in before. So they may have been in PG accommodations in the city. They've all gone back to their hometowns of different places and villages, and they're actually working out of that. And it's certainly one of the biggest mind shift this world has seen. So that's one. The second thing that has happened is, I think when you look at the way businesses have organized themselves, a whole lot of people, now that location is not a constraint, and people are really ready to talk about working with gig workers. A lot of specialists have sort of moved into that. We are going to talk about that. And then, of course, in my view, another interesting dimension that has changed is that the workplace, which has always been looked at as, people would say, when you come into the workplace, leave your emotions behind, because this is not the place for emotions. That's what we've always been told. But now that, you've come into the place where we've always experienced emotions, which is home, and that's where we are working. So I also think that it's going to be the beginning of that seepage of emotions. And a lot of business models are going to really start by working on emotions. And I'm going to sort of kick off this entire conversation first with Rashmi. And, you are in the business of emotions, which is around food. Food has a whole lot of emotions. What is the biggest shift that you've experienced in your business when you sort of look at it pre-pandemic, post-pandemic? We just paint the as is and, current scenario, the prior pre-pandemic and now. What is the big difference?
If you think of food, and India, food's always driven by taste. I think the biggest shift that we are seeing is how people are going to look at food post-pandemic. One, I think the whole restaurant industry is going through a once in a century disruption. A lot of restaurants, or the way we used to consume food and occasions, going to change. And the way it impacts the business is, I think customers are going to demand quality, safety, reliability over taste, menu, variety. And I think that's going to be the big shift on how businesses consider what they need to do, how employees need to operate in the new situations. I think safety becoming the biggest factor in success of the business. So yeah, I think a lot of changes that have already happened, and I think a lot more that would come by.
So I'm just curious to know, Rashmi, do people have more of comfort food, or are they eating healthier? What is the trend that you've noticed from the orders that you get?
I think the whole health dose is coming out of home cooked food, because in our mind, home food is as healthy as it gets. So I think people from outside are ordering in actually indulgences. So all the chocolates, desserts, biryani, noodles, pizzas. So I think it is right now on the indulgence side. When they get back to probably meeting folks and being in the office situation, I think the healthy food would start getting ordered.
Terrific. Milan, when you sort of look at the shift, when you look at the shift, which is the workplace, the way people are working, you're in a company that has been at the center space of, enabling this work from anywhere kind of a model, automation anywhere. And you're also doing a lot of work with the government. Tell us a little bit about what do you see happening in the space of the shift in business models leading to a shift in skills. So what are those things that you observe?
I think early days, Abhijit, but two things, as you rightly said in the very beginning, that work from home was an option given to very few. I think it's completely reversed, where work from home for many industries may be a norm, where certain percentage of work will always happen from home. Very interestingly, it opens up the talent dimension, that you are no longer accessing talent which is available closest to you. It will open up an absolutely new, and I think there are seasoned HR professionals on this panel, they'll talk more. But in the way we see it is that work from home will continue, and then talent access will happen. The second interesting thing is that, and I'm start with government as an example. We have seen a tremendous interest in government to get things digitized. This was never a priority, and this pandemic has just brought this sense of urgency. What it means from a skills point of view is that every professional knowing that how their work will appear in a digital world, a quasi-digital physical world, if I may use that word. I think that's the second reality. And probably third, from a skill set point of view, I think we considered knowing Excel or a PowerPoint as a mandatory requirement to get into a corporate world of any organized corporate job. We believe that getting the basic coding or building a bot, building a certain piece of code to get work done is that new minimum hygiene which will come from a skill point of view. So those are like early, I would say, observations. It'll play it out, but clearly work from home, building coding and digital and bot skills, and finally every sector going digital is likely to be the most obvious outcome of this this entire last 6-7 months.
Rashmi, food is the business that you have. Would you see that a similar trend is there in the kind of technical skills? What do you look for now as compared to, let's say, pre-pandemic? Is that a shift, or is that an imaginary thing? What has been?
Cloud Kitchen was anyways using technology as an enabler. I think the world's going to shift to a lot more of technology-enabled kitchens, automation at a kitchen level, reducing the manpower dependency to do some of the basic jobs. I think technology at every step. For example, customer service through an automated bot, using more tools to connect your team and collaborate virtually. I think some of these things we also were not using as much as we are now using in last 4 months. So there is a shift in use of technology of available things, and you will also build more. We expect more IoT to come into kitchens to get you more data about the health of the business, about the safety of the food, which I think is another year away. But there are tools that are, being designed right now.
Fabulous. Raj, when you see creativity and innovation are going to be creating new business models, is going to be the basis of a lot of these changes. Would you see that that is as important today in the banking, financial sector, insurance, BFSI? If you sort of look at that, is there a pattern that you see in the technical skills, and also possibly comment on the creativity and innovation aspect of it? What has been your experience?
I think all of us have just got into this cauldron of a big experiment and just run with it, right? Pretty much, I think initially I would say a lot of technical skills played out. People obviously got their VPN, VDIs, bridges, laptops, all those enablers in place. And I can safely say that, there are immense learnings. One clear thing being that, work from home is not really for the people who are mummy trapped, right? Or people, work really happens, and people have their own myths and fallacies about whether it is really scalable. It has proved to be scalable. We are here in 5 months, and most of the organizations really are working from home. As a bank, I think what you said, fundamentally what it has done is asked us to pivot ourselves and pivot even the business model, so to say. For instance, I'll give you an example. We as a bank were definitely out there. We essential services, we were open. Branches were initially a service center and have been a service center where customers come in and leverage the services, or ask for queries, etc. And customers initially in the initial period weren't coming. So what do you do with the sales staff, and how do you kind of make them productive in a work from home scenario? The key skill I think we realized is, and there are adjacent skills in every organization. So we had like an outbound call center. We got them to train these guys, and the sales cycle completely changed. The features, advantages, benefits, the traditional model of selling is very different in a virtual setup. And that needed a lot of reskilling. That needed even the, you talk about creativity. I think creativity in selling came into being. I think for businesses like us, all of us not only have to look at how the front end will operate, but the back end as well. So contactless, he talked about digitization, all those things will emerge. But from a people standpoint, I think clearly problem solving skill. Second is the agility to learn, because what we've seen in the space of 5 to 6 months is, especially if you're working from home, there'll be micro specialists and there'll be domains of micro specialists. People are reskilling themselves into getting to adjacent areas and understanding that those will be really critical. But even in your traditional areas of selling, negotiation, influencing skills, I think there are ways and means that people will have to adapt to being relevant in the virtual world. And I think even more so. And creativity and innovation will come in if people are able to frame problems. And I think a lot of the pivoting of the business models will happen if managers and team leaders also bring those skills to the forefront and question why and how we can make it relevant. So in all of this, one thing is very clear for me personally. What has changed is I would still say the role of the manager and the leader. The traditional skill sets, the traditional way of traditional ways of communication, all have undergone a change, and a lot more humanness is involved right now. At least is expected what you bring to the workplace. So the fundamental shift, I would say, is more from the manager and the leader that is expected, and more so.
Okay, thanks. Shiv, I would like you to sort of take a more broad spectrum view. And the reason being that, in Aditya Birla Group, you also have a range of industries, that are covered from everything from retail, manufacturing, financial services. You actually represent in some sense a kind of a microcosm What is common as a shift in terms of technical skills across the businesses, and what is unique to any of the businesses? You just give me a bird's eye view of that, and then we'll get into the details.
Yeah. So if you look at any large company, if it's integrated to the global economy, then you see the first thing you need to look at is there an impact of a China country or a China factor or a China-America trade war factor? I think that's very important to build into your plans and to understand what that means to you. On the other hand, if you are a purely domestic company focused on serving the needs of the customers in the country, then I think I would say first, I think Raj also mentioned this, first you need to think about your business model. Now, what's happened with this situation is that a business model, the way I would define it, is the shortest distance between the product and the service and the consumer, number one. And number two, the least friction path between the consumer and the product stroke service. That's the first thing that a company needs to think about. The second one, which I find a lot of people are not doing right now across the country, is staying on strategy. For example, you have a paint company launching a sanitizer. You have an apparel company launching a floor cleaner. These are all exactly the wrong things to do. If you really want the best results, I think you need to focus on your strategy. Next is, I think there's a lot of complexity and we want to give consumers a lot of choice, and you need to balance that because choice always leads to much more complexity. And I would say this is the time for what I call a 3E approach, and many companies are doing it, which is enterprise end-to-end. Because the issue right now which we face is demand contraction. Okay, every sector is going through a demand contraction. Okay, that is volatile and that is not known. And hence your ability to go end-to-end in supplying through the supply chain, the product or the service or whatever you want to do, right to the consumer at his doorstep, is absolutely critical. And I think you need to upskill people, not just your people. And many companies are upskilling their partners, their ecosystem, etc. And I think those are the kind of things which are really coming to the fore.
So, when you look at the entire process, so we've looked at some very interesting trends. We just see the summary of the two broad things that we talked about. In terms of technical skills, there are certain kind of shifts that are happening in the business model. And potentially, when you look at business model shifts, it takes a little bit of time to stabilize. So we are going to see early days of that. There's automation of some kind. So that's another thing. The third thing that we talked about, Shiv mentioned this whole need to stay on strategy. So that's anything that I've missed out so far, anything else that caught your attention and what the others have said? I mean, something that you picked up, is this it? Because then if not, then I have a question for you, Manish.
Yeah, I would say, just reacting to your point, Abhijit, and what I think the other panelists have eloquently said. If you look at skills, split it as hard skills and soft skills. There are hard skills like coding, like sales, etc., etc. But in this situation, I think the softer skills are going to be so much more important. Adaptability, agility. People Resilience. Who are self-organized but selfless collaborators. That's the kind of skill set you really need in order to get better in today's world. Because when demand contracts, your option 17 to 30% of companies drop out in any crisis. About 10 really win. And the whole process is about how can you be the best in your industry. It's not about saying I'm going to gain 20% share. If you are the best in your industry, you will get there. And if you want to be the best in your industry, and every crisis is an opportunity, which you shouldn't waste, then it rests on the soft skills of your people. And that's the real advantage in this situation.
Rashmi, Manisha, I'm going to come back to you. Rashmi, question I have for you is, as a startup, the talent pool that you work with, do you really pick and choose if there is a person who has strong technical skills, very strong technical skills, really low on soft skills? Would you hire that person, yes or no, and why?
We have hired. There are certain roles where you believe the technical skills would really sail through. But the learning in the startup again and again, and I've done startups now for 12 years, is I think the attitude matters way more than your current capability that you bring on the table. Because the business situation is unique, the agility that is needed to succeed in this business environment is not what has been done in the past, which means your problem solving skills, your ability to navigate ambiguity and ability to persevere or stay on track. I think all of these, the attitude or the personality makes all the difference, and people acquire skills. Time and again, we have seen people acquire skills way faster than we thought they could. And they come up with better answers than somebody who has replicated it in the past. So I think we'll always choose someone with the right behavior skills or the soft skills and the hard skills.
Milind, what are some of the, if there is someone who's looking to invest in building their technical skills, what is the most valuable skill to be investing in right now? So if there are 3 courses that I can choose, what would those be? I'm going to come back and ask everybody for their response and the 3 technical skills that they would be. It could be the same things that Milind is talking about, but could be different. But yeah, I mean, so Milind, you're the first one. Tell us.
Yeah, so Abhijit, I would say that 3 in top of my list. I would say definitely around basic coding, because coding is nothing but a logical thinking. To put blocks in a manner. Now you call it as a coding on a language, or a Python could be a coding in a platform like someone like us, and so on and so forth. But that's the first part. The second I would put very highly is on the on the communication and collaboration, because even in technical area, what the functional ask is, what you build, what you deliver, and then how do you get that feedback loop going. A lot of terminology we use in the technology world, but essentially a collaboration and communication going together. A third skill which I think is a more of abstracting and building assets of whatever you do. I think this is one skill as a nation, if I may just take a little bit of a larger view, is that we are very good as a nation on processing and somebody else's processes, somebody else's models, but not building. I would say probably financial services domain, fintech have done exceptional job because they've created India-centric models, which is nothing but building assets. So lack of any other word, I would say that how do you take a certain knowledge and codify it for a repeatable and reuse.
So creating a product in the real sense, if you're building a product, and that's fabulous. I mean, that's a new one. I've really never heard anyone bring that one up before. But Raj, what would you say? You sort of said a lot of nice things about the fintech thing, so you can just, take a pat on the back for that. But what would you say is if you had to look for 3 big skills in BFSI, what would those be? Technical skills, what would that be? Soft skills, if you would? Combination.
Yeah, so it'll be a combination of both. I think the technical skills will remain. One is the data-based decision making and being comfortable with data, and not descriptive statistics, but managers need to just get conversant with data and all of that, because the past ways of review, etc., will change. That apart, I think the second part is also, as we move to a work from home, and I'm just calling it project management, just as a broad term, managing your work. Level of contracts, scope it out, go back, collaborate, all of that. But the project management expertise is also another area that is critical. And I think influencing without the command and control, and having the creative problem solving. And these skills are absolutely essential when you talk about design, putting the processes in place, especially even if you understand the customer, but you don't capture it and are not able to design it. That's a shame. So I think these 3 skills, I think, will be very, very critical. Is understanding the customer and the ability to encapsulate and frame hypothesis and design accordingly.
So Shiv, I'm going to, put a question based on what Raj just identified. She talked about the importance of database decision making. Now, when you have a scenario like what we are going through today, there isn't enough data from the past. So, would sensing, the ability to, sense making, for want of a better word, when they say, is that going to be as important, or is data still going to be important? Which of the two, and how does one build that?
Absolutely. I think you're right, Abhijit. If there's one thing which nobody has, is a playbook to deal with the current situation. That syllabus has not been written, that book has not been written. So everybody is grappling with their own set of information, their own sensing mechanism. Okay, absolutely right. But one thing I would say about data is in the last 3-4 months, what I have seen of all our businesses and companies is that data and information has become boundaryless. Everybody has access to it. For example, today, if you take customer data as an example, your finance team has access to it, your sales team has access to it, your marketing team has access to it, thanks to the digitization process, and your IT team has access to it. So the issue is not that there's only one privy, somebody looking at data. There are 10 pairs of eyes looking at data. So you're absolutely right. And I think if you interrogate data hard enough, it'll confess sometime. And it'll confess to an insight. That's my true feeling. And it'll confess to an insight based on which you can get to the market. And going back to what we started with, I think I would pick 3 skills. Digital, absolutely. No doubt about it, end to end. Second, I'd pick.
When you say digital, tell me what does that really comprise?
In digital, there are 3 parts. If you look at a manufacturing organization, by and large, the first is the customer-facing end, the ability to connect in different ways to the customer. If you're a service provider or something else, how do you provide unique experiences to that consumer? Okay, that's what would be the role of that. Sometimes you'll have the data, sometimes you'll not have the data. If you're an FMCG company, you'll collaborate with the e-commerce boys. You'll also collaborate with the modern trade boys to get one view of the customer. In the center is the engine room, which is cranking up on sheer efficiency and productivity. So all that digital does is to ensure that the processes run absolutely smoothly and the handovers and the SLAs are maintained. In the back end, there's a lot of juice in procurement and building the ecosystem to get complete visibility to the back end so that it serves the front end volatility in demand. That's how you would look at digitization in an organization. 3 parts to it. Okay. The second I would say is customer centricity. Today in a demand volatility situation, you have to be better connected with customers and consumers. That's the only way you're going to win. And I believe companies and leaders who are externally focused vis-a-vis internal focus and measures will tend to win more. And the last I would say is, I think Raj or one of the people mentioned that whatever you do, please experiment. Either you scale fast or you fail fast, but make the decision. This is not a time to desert. This is not a time for analysis paralysis.
Rashmi, in case of a startup, this is also a time when people are being very cautious. I mean, you're at one particular end of the, you and Milan, you're at the higher end of the startup scale, but when you're looking at people who are, the smaller startups, the dreamers, who are just getting started, what are the skills that matter most for if you're a founder or you're an employee? Are those different skills? And if so, in this time, what would you build?
I think some of the stuff that has been discussed, I think stays true for even startups. I think agility, perseverance, or, staying on strategy, what is most important, or customer centricity. Because some of the startups, for example, if you've lost a lot of revenue, you just have to be focused on what can I do to get revenue? And, is it a short-term strategy or a long-term pivot that we are doing is eventually what the team needs to take a call on. So I think it is about taking a call with data interpretation, some of your gut, and then putting your power behind that, can we see it through? So it has to be a mix of, I think data remains crucial, customer centricity remains absolutely crucial, because if you don't have a market, what are you a startup for? So,
So is it, when you look at, Raj, when you look at the kind of shift that happens in a large organization such as yours, do these skills assume differing levels of importance at the entry level, at the mid level, and at the senior level? Are they substantially different, given the fact that we are now all starting, in some sense, at ground zero? So does it mean that things which are important at the senior level, they are different from what is different at the important at the entry level? Would you say that, or is it the same?
See, in an organization like ours, I would say, especially it comes from business model and how the customer is really responding. And for a long time, at least the initial part was about where's the customer, how do you reach out to him, how do you interact with him, and from there starts the entire skill sets, and also looking at, as the panelists mentioned, looking at the business model in terms of how do you make it digital, how do you get the customer. And we have an advantage in financial services that we are far more digital than perhaps some other manufacturing concerns. But even there, the customer really likes the touch and feel, physical, a brick and mortar kind of a feeling, right? And maybe because the customers behave a certain way, our skill sets at the frontline level also evolved accordingly. But that had to change overnight. So I would say the biggest skill set, and all of us across the chain have had to learn, is the customer interaction skills. And that is something that is being iterated. And I think the selling cycles, and I would again reiterate, have really changed. And that's something that we've cognizant of. Whilst we are trying to change the engine for the external, the front-facing part, there is also huge work that needs to be done at the internal part, and that's somewhere the middle managers and the leaders come in. How you managing the experiments, how you deciding, are you getting the insight out? So, in a sense, what the crisis has taught us is there's a lot of work happening, and a lot of people will be also wondering, is there some sense in this entire calm? But I think chaos has been good internally as well, because it's been a time for creativity and bringing about the change which people are realizing. So one of the big projects that we're looking at is internally as well. As we talked about digitization, saying that, how can the workplace be on the mobile? Everything. You don't need to come to the desktop. It requires a change internally as well. But it meant people across various levels obviously had to look at the technical skills and the problem solving skills are differently. But I think the fundamental change, I'll come back again, at the leadership level and the managers, it has been, especially in a virtual world, because the frame of reference still happens to be the manager. A lot of communication, a lot of engagement, and just having calming conversations, energizing people, calming the anxieties, especially as our guys were out there in the field despite COVID, despite the risks associated. And how do you kind of have military discipline on bringing the engagement communication model out there? That definitely, I think I have seen a huge shift.
Milind, when you look at the organizations, typically, if you look at the range of your customers, you've had a funny situation, at least in the past. You've had a scenario where people who are taking the decisions, usually people at the top, they are some of the least savvy technically in terms of being able to understand. And by that, I don't mean awareness of digital, but just the mindset of being able to think in a manner, what potentially could this be doing? This kind of technology, how we could use it in a creative fashion. Has that changed? And the hypothesis I want, the group here to respond to is, historically, leaders have been encouraged to look within, so don't worry about what's happening outside. And now I kind of think that really, in a hyper-connected world, the organization is no longer like an aquarium where, you can see what's happening outside, but you need to worry only about the water which is inside. You're like the fish which is swimming in the aquarium. Now that aquarium has become a part of the ocean, so, there is no real difference between internal and external. Does it, make sense in the world that you are seeing firsthand? What is your view, Milind?
So I think, Abhijit, some of the essentials do not change. What you offer, your proposition to your customers, whether in the business segment or you're dealing with retail consumers. However, one thing which has certainly changed is that the technology to transform the way you interact with everybody, especially the external world, which was generally left to the IT department of functions. And obviously in last 4-5 months, whether it's telecom, banks, government, they all have started realizing that not just the CEO, but even CFO and head of HR and all those leaders, which probably did not take very active interest in how technology can make a business highly efficient, productive, effective. I think that's certainly which has come in. So that's one outside in perspective. The second part, I think this is the world where, and I like to quote an example with one of my largest insurance customers. If you take a life insurance, it was always assumed that your medical checkup will be done physically, right? And even before pandemic, they introduced a mobile based checkup. Now the reality is that once that happens, the balance 11 players have no choice but to follow it. And I think what's happening is that, and that's where that external view comes into a bigger way. And unless the strategic layer of the organization is not involved in thinking how to leverage technology to change everything, Shiv very nicely articulated middle part, the back end and the front end. Unless you are incorporating that and thinking that technology can at least help you not necessarily differentiate but be in pace with your peer group, I think that's absolutely many companies have realized. And one more comment I think I would add is that you talked about the technology awareness and technology knowledge. I think it's not so much about the technology itself, but what it can do to deliver. And there are so many instances where 12 months back none of us knew that a business can be delivered or a customer experience can be sought like that, and suddenly somebody came and offered it to us using technology. So I think that more than understanding technology, because that your CTO or CDO can take care, but using the power of that and how you can use it in your operating model, I think that's the real switch which has happened.
Rashmi, one of the things I wanted to check was that, when you think about the big shift in the post-pandemic world, in the startup scenario, a lot of people are now working from home. What is has it changed your definition of who do you rely on more versus who you would have relied on more? I mean, has that configuration of your top performers changed? Do you look at people differently when they work from home? Because in that sense, is there a different skill that comes to the forefront? What would you say, Rashmi?
So I think, firstly, I think work from home and more from a startup, which was in the mix of digital plus a lot of our work is physical in terms of delivery. I think work from home almost sounded like, people are asking for half a day leave or they have something else to finish. So I think there's a huge shift in the mindset that it's not a chutti. People will work from home. Work from home is serious business and achievement is coming out of it. So I think whatever we could shift to people working from home has been done. I think, so the big shift, I think, is firstly, I think comes back to self-motivation. People who are self-starters, people who are problem solvers, hustlers, whether they're working from home, working from their hometown, they're around or not around, I think they're constantly at problem solving. And given the situation, I think a lot of ground motivation, reducing anxiety for people, saying that we are with you while we are all fighting this pandemic together and we have to continue working. I think it has been a huge shift on one, how people engaged with each other as a team. How do they motivate each other? That self-drive that, while things could be very tough and the answers are not known, the playbook is not known, I'm really out there trying to be the best ever version of myself. So I think top performers and non-top performers, I think in these times, one, you have to take everyone together. And it could have been a different mental equation for some folks. But I think the focus has been to take everyone together.
Brilliant. Shiv, I want to pose a hypothetical scenario to you that, if you were sort of an advisor to the organizations on building skills, or the government or any large body, I mean, a very large set of skills. and you are looking at the scenario from a 18 to 24 month time period, looking at that. What are some of the skills you would advise to build on priority? By what method? So I'm going to come back and ask everybody else also, but I want to sort of really start with you, because you really have that kind of a microcosm of various industries. And so it should be things that apply across. What would be, the priorities you would set for that skill, and what is the methodology you would build? So we've heard of all the older methods, 70, 20, 10, experiential, this and that. I mean, so, do these really hold true now? If you had to build those, what would you do? You have no constraints. What would you do?
Yeah. So if I would advise anybody, be it government, and you broadened it, and thank you for that, because that gave me a lead into the answer. Be it government, be it corporations, be it NGOs, anybody. Let's take a real life example of what's happening from New York to New Zealand to Germany, etc. There are a bunch of 7-8 leaders who've handled this crisis better than anybody else. So obviously they've displayed some skills, and I will use that as the method to say, is it possible to learn anything from that? Because most large corporations have 200,000 people, 300,000 people, 600,000 people. But countries have millions of people, not one or two, okay? So if I were to take Andrew Cuomo and all those wonderful women leaders who've led from the front and taken their country or society to more safe place than where they were. Number one, they were extremely inclusive. I think that's very, very important. Number two, they're very, very focused. Number three, they're very fact-based. They took the facts as they were and said, this is the fact, this is the science, let's address it. Next, they were very empathetic. Next, I think they didn't worry about who got the credit as long as they solved the problem. Okay, and the problem was to contain COVID, not to extinguish it, to contain it. So the problem might not be that you'll get back to 100% of demand, but if you can get to 90% of demand, then you achieved something there. And I think they have displayed to us more than anybody else that it's important to follow rules. All these leaders have followed rules compared to other leaders who didn't follow rules. And I think all of them leverage technology and enforce rock solid discipline. So if heads of state can do this, surely, anybody who runs a smaller enterprise, who runs a smaller institution or an NGO can take that as a playbook to say, hey, maybe there's some lesson in it for us.
Fantastic. And you talked about, the way people have communicated, some of these leaders. I'm, for one, a big fan of, and various other people. You talked about women leaders in New Zealand. The Prime Minister actually, somebody said that, when you define an essential worker, would the tooth fairy be considered an essential worker? A kid wrote to her.
Yeah.
And she didn't bat an eyelid, she didn't pause, and she said, yes, absolutely, the tooth fairy would be an essential worker. And so we will ensure that tooth fairies never stop working. I mean, so I think it's a tremendous ability for the person to be able to respond in real time, and shows the sensitivity of the person. So I was, for one, bowled over by the fact that, a world leader can actually do something like that. And on national television without feeling really embarrassed, because that for me is a big shift, being able to deal with emotions in the workplace, which we have never done, because we've always been very embarrassed about saying that, oh, I'm feeling bad. No, whatever you feel is left outside of the workplace. So I think it's a welcome shift. Raj, if you were to have no constraints of any kind, and you were sort of advising people beyond your organization, various sectors, different sizes of organizations, what are some of the skills that you would just simply prioritize and say, just right now, just focus on this, build this particular thing? Methodology that you would adopt, what would that be?
I think Shiv also beautifully captured it. Frankly speaking, it is about being in it together. So one of the things is, and we've seen it, even the way that the crisis got managed, nobody had the answers, but you had distributed leadership in that sense, the people across various centers, locations, etc., standing up and doing their bit. So one is that, saying that how you've got to trust your people. I think trust. And how do you kind of get the human side of you, expose your vulnerability? And I've had leaders who would say, I'm really concerned about you. What can we do and how can I help you? It is such a powerful thing to acknowledge your follies and being humble enough to say, I don't know. And there's no shame. There's no shame in accepting that you don't know. It's okay.
Sure.
And together. So I think that is one powerful, having conversations with people, bringing your human side, and ensuring that trust remains. That's one definite area that I think is something that need to skill people. Second part is being candid. Honesty always helps. If you
authenticity.
Yeah, authenticity. Being, you've messed up, you've made a mistake. It's okay. Move on. And third is listening. In these times, it's important to know that you don't have the answers, especially the days of, having one power center and having all the answers, especially in uncertain times. That's not build resilience in your business models also if you're constantly listening. And how do you listen, whether to the customers or internal employees? You've got to be listening, and don't shoot the messenger. Sometimes there'll be bad news.
Right.
In terms of methodology, in all of these three things, I would say, and these are really soft skills that we're talking about, I have actually opened my eyes to the fact that earlier I would have said, some of these skills can we really teach in small group formats virtually? For me personally, maybe I wouldn't have chosen that as a choice, but in this world, I would say virtual small group interactions have actually worked beautifully. And I've seen people participate. And I would have been a little more anxious earlier, whether people will really talk about it and get their emotions out, because you can't really see. But technology is wonderful. And if you use it and leverage it properly and think, we've hugely benefited from it, having the small group interaction. So I'm not so hung up on the methodology, whether the platform, whether it's physical or
yeah, sure.
Yeah, but methodology is really small group right now, because storytelling and ensuring the stories get cascaded, because that's really, really powerful to kind of not only role model, but embed the message.
Rashmi, what is the leadership skill you have sort of really tried to develop in yourself? And I would like to sort of compare this with the early days of your startup of Fresh Menu. Let's just keeping one particular, structured thing in mind. What did you focus on, and what was the most powerful skill that you, now looking back as a founder, that matters? And when the business scales up, does that change, or is it more of the same? How do you view it?
No, I don't think it's more of the same. It's different skills of 0 to 1, and then working on a scaled up version. I think 0 to 1, the founders have to do, I think it's largely hustle, the doer, the hustle, multitasking, you're doing massive amount of sales and recruiting. So I think you're basically working 24 hours a day to get it off the ground. The first 18 months for every startup is survival, which means the fear of failure drives you every day to do more and to try more, experiment more. I think eventually some method in the madness arrives. You have some answers, some clarity, economics are understood. And then you have to work on building the organization, building the teams, SOP. And I think India, we struggle the most with designing new SOP. We keep looking for somebody else may have a template SOP, and is there something that I can learn from them? So I think designing new SOP lies on the founder, and you need to really drive it across the organization if you really want to scale and continue scaling. So I think the skills are different. As a leader, I think one thing that I learned over time is I can't do everything. I will have to rely on a lot more people, empower them, empower the teams, but focus on delivery. So the metrics and how do you define, how does it overall cascade into goals, and how the SOPs help us get there. So method in the madness is, I think, the drive.
A lot of I've been curious to sort of ask this question: at which stage should a startup actually have a human resources person doing that role separately? Because you talked about different things that the founder has to focus on. At which stage should the founder hand over? What is that size where it matters?
There's no magic answer, but I think startup should have HR person on day one. And I'll tell you why. Because the company would be carried forward on the culture, the kind of team that you put together, and how do they work together. And without having HR processes early on, and without the focus on people as a function, and it could be everything from recruitment to compensation to training to team and collaboration. I think HR is probably the first recruit that you need to do, and for every startup. But there are people I know who hire after first 100 people, first 50 people, but no magic answer.
Right. Milan, would you hire a different kind of a skill builder? When the organization, let's say, is in the first 100 people versus first 1,000 people, 500 people, to build skills and culture, would you look for a different methodology and a different person? What should that be?
So, I'm going to rely on what I have personally executed. So there's a book called as Selling the Wheel. And Selling the Wheel talks about 4 phases of any organization. And it talks about in the early stages, what you really focus on, where founders are involved, is the technical wizards who can build products. As you move from that to somebody who can scale, from there to relationship, and finally an efficiency machine. Depending on the journey the organizations are on, I would say that skill will be valued. And I think we all have seen statistics on how companies grow, where they reach a certain level of growth cycle, and then a stabilization and so on. So I think that's the view. Abhijit, I just wanted to comment, if you're okay, on the earlier question.
Yes, of course.
On the skill is, you see, I think at least the industry which I represent, there is this high degree of uncertainty as well. Due to the demand contraction, a lot of jobs and roles are linked to how the end customer businesses work. And I think the reality today, in my personal view, is that in India, we've always had an assumption that the jobs and the roles will continue, however big or the smaller the company is. And I think that notion, particularly given the pandemic, first time we have a GDP contraction, end customer geographies where the work is being done has a significant impact. And I feel in that context, the biggest skill for a leader and managers, as the case may be, is the transparency and being very, very factual about the state of the business. That are we making margin? Are we not making margin? Our demands are going to impact. Because as I see around me in our industry, whether it's software, whether it's services, IT services, I think this is one area where we feel that the technical people say my job is to do this, but they are not aware of the status of the business. Are we margin positive? Are you cash flow positive? Do you have a great demand? Is your demand shrinking, and hence what you need to do? I think that's one area, just as an observation. Probably some of the other geographies are used to it. In India, a lot of our workforce at mid to senior level as well are not used to this reality. And to me, that's a very important skill set as a leader, to factually communicate the state of the business as it is, versus just giving everything is great, everything will get fixed up. I just thought it's important, at least in our industry, it's a very, very crucial element.
We are sort of coming to the end of the conversation, but I want to end on a sort of a personal note with each one of you. I wanted to ask that we all talk about building skills. During this pandemic, has a particular skill, have you been able to build a particular skill during this pandemic? And if so, what actually did you do to build that skill? or has it been more of, there's so many things to manage, then there is no time to build anything? How do you sort of look at it? Raj, I want to start with your experience of it. What have you learned during this particular pandemic time, last few months? What have you learned and built for yourself?
This is a question I dread because, for me, I think the initial period I had, all of us actually, cooking, chores at house, etc., is something that we were pushed into getting out, completely outside my comfort zone. So I would say, yeah, there are skills that I picked up. But one important acknowledgement I had to do for myself is I can't do everything. It's okay. Some balls will drop. And that realization happened late. Because you were, as a professional, especially in a crisis situation, you're trying to kind of steer the ship and all of that. And I've kind of had to step back because one of the things I realize, especially as an HR leader, is the emotion part that we keep on talking about. Virtual world is also completely blurred. The life at home and work, your home is your office. And in fact, I've had kids sitting and saying, if this is the kind of work that you do, I don't know what will we do, so parents complaining, if this is the work, we don't want any piece of it. But here is where I think as leaders, we had to make a distinction. And one of the things I have had to learn is to dial down.
17 hours.
So that I think has been a critical skill, and acknowledging that we don't have the answers. Really don't have the answers.
Fabulous. Okay, all right. So Rashmi, what has been your learning? What have you learned? Tell us about that. By the way, do you cook?
I cook, yes. I
Okay,
always.
all right.
So, I think
I had to do that check. I meant to ask you that early on, just check whether you sort of do that. Please go ahead. No, I
think the biggest change is, I think, to learn to let go, because this was a situation where you just had no control. And I think as an individual, you have to let go of that fear that, if I don't have the answers, and how would things work, or you feel very bad that you don't have the answers. So I think one, acknowledging that, yes, things could be completely out of your control. The other is gratitude. I think taking a step back and acknowledging of what all good things you've got in life. And I think that is a big realization. The third piece is connecting with the family and spending time with them, like how much I took them for granted, that I'm very busy, and last few years you've genuinely lived a very deprived life from building relationships. I think I've got back to part of that, not fully yet, but I think we've made a big shift.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to that. There were, during this time, I have connected back with so many people, friends and family who I had, I mean, with every good intent, I've been able to do that. That's been something I feel really good about, that you're connecting back. What have you learned, Milan? What is it that these last couple of months have given you time to do, which you haven't done before?
I think the skill, on a lighter note, I learned officially, I learned Urdu from my engineering days. I wanted to.
So, ek sher suna dijiye fir.
Share is हमने, okay, I can't recite it, but I can definitely try. मुश्किलें हम पर गिरी इतनी कि आसान हो गई. So that's Ghalib, where it says that you just got so used to it that so I think that's probably the top of the mind I can think of. But I think on a professional note, one of the things which I think both Raj and Rashmi mentioned, learned is about understanding constraints, which of everyone at all levels. I think generally at work environment, you said that I want to get it done, and and that's, I think, the results in a leadership role. Everybody says it differently, but they want it, right? I mean, they use a lot of English to say the same point, that I want results. But I think that while asking for results, understanding the constraints, people working from home don't have connectivity, the customers are not picking up the calls, all of that. I think that's been an amazing revelation, that and that brings me to my larger learning, that the relationship built over the years gives you business, gives you that chance in a period. So I think it goes back and re-emphasize my learning over the years that invest in relationship with customers, suppliers, employees. I think that pays off like anything in such a situation, and will continue to pay off in future as well.
Fabulous. Shiv, I'm just
Yeah.
curious to know what you've learned.
Yeah. So the thing I learned most was, how do you move people from being grieving to getting the best out of them on a daily basis? Because, talking to business people, 2 businesses I run plus the strategy team, every day somebody says there's a lockdown here, market is not open, I'm losing this, I'm losing that, etc. In normal career, you don't go through that. You go through maybe a bad year and then you rally the troops around at the beginning of the year in an annual speech or a conference, etc. Here, every day I had to listen to people to say, hey, things are not good. You have to give them sufficient time to grieve and then pivot them to say, hey, let's be grateful. We can win like this. Can we do it like this? Is there another option? Using the power of the team to get the best out of everybody. Because every day, people would tell you a sob story and something going wrong somewhere or the other. Last 150 days, I've had daily calls with all 3 teams. That's 450 calls. And trust me, that's one new skill I've developed, to say there's a time for grieving, we've grieved, move forward, there's a time for winning. I think that's something which I will really hold dear, what I've learned over the last 150 days.
Fantastic. So, with that, we sort of...
What have you?
Yes. I was hoping nobody's going to ask me that. I think I have, in terms of learning some skills, I have learned a little bit more of painting, different mediums. I've experimented and learned. So a lot of my work is put online. So, I think my life is an open blog. So I've done a lot of that. I've completed my book, which has been the other thing that I worked on, is to crunch time to sort of do that and do it along with the work. So I think for me, learning the time management part of it, and a little bit, it'll gladden your heart to know that, I've been taking baby steps in the kitchen. I'm a terrible cook. I'm far better at eating than cooking, but I've, so Raj, when you said that this is not something that you enjoy, I could so totally relate to that, but I've made an effort. I'm not very good at it. And I don't think I ever will be, but I have decided to challenge myself on that. But, I just want to tell you that it's been absolutely phenomenal to be learning from you guys, and just such a rich variety of experience. Rashmi, from you to bring in the whole concept of what it means as a founder to go from 0 to 1, and how the skills shift for yourself and as for the organization. Raj, for you to talk about, one particular business, which is a giant, in order to sort of really think about the technology part of it and the people part of it and your own challenges of working from that. It was really inspiring. I really like that. And Milan, for you to be, talking about the way you looked at skills, just the sheer gamut of things from technical as well as, soft skills. What struck me was, I was expecting you to respond entirely about technical skills, that you learned this, but, you sort of, it was 1/3 technical skills and the other 2/3 was really soft skills. That what I found was really enlightening for me. And Shiv, of course, you have an ability to connect the dots, not just of all the, speakers, what they say, but also to sort of really simplify a lot of things in a language which is very enlightening. So I always think that it's, fascinating and very illuminating to be having a conversation with you on anything. And that I've said it to you before. But thank you very much. It's been such a fabulous experience. And guys, thanks a lot for being there, and look forward to meeting all of you again. Yes. And
thank you, Abhijit. All the best for your book. Thank you, Raj. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you, Soumya. All the best.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rashmi.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
Bye.
Great fun.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.